Hello everyone. So this is an acceleration of what my original plan had been. I had planned on holding off until the new year to bring forth the Julien McBain show, but a couple of things happened today that were kind of major, and I really want to talk about them. And since my normal segments were not really the appropriate venue, we're going to jump right in. We're navigating the Cyberpunk dystopia. This is the Julien McBain show. The Julien McBain Show is, of course, brought to you by my patrons, who's doing a sound check. Without whose support, I would not be able to do this. Thank you so much. Okay, so I'm sure you were all worried that we were not going to be playing Entropia Universe. We're playing Entropia Universe. Come on, guys. So as I jump into Mayhem, I'm going to start getting into the content I've produced for my first episode. And the irony is that this is kind of a hybrid, because the things that happened today that made me want to do a show rather than my normal segment. Actually, we're going to use the Lara instead. I want to get them up to level 10. I think we're good. Made it really important, in my opinion, to do this, because although I'm not usually someone to do breaking news, and I mean I'm doing this on a Monday, you're going to see it on a Wednesday. It might have actually hit mainstream media by Wednesday, although I don't have very much faith in them anymore. I wanted to discuss this and why I think we live in the cyberpunk dystopia today, and what is probably the most boring version of it could possibly be. Because let's be facing it, we could have had the fun. I've gone over this in previous segments. We could have had the fun dystopia, right? Yeah, things suck, but at least we get some cool cybernetics. Didn't happen that way. But here is how things went for me, and this is why I ended up doing this. Because it has occurred to me more than once that we live in the absolute stupidest timeline. Okay. Of all of the realities we could have selected, we wound up in this one. Today, on Twitter, the glowing hellscape that is the Blue Bird, there was a war between personalities of the blue check type over whether or not a person should use the title doctor when they have a doctorate that may or may not be of the medical profession. Some said yes, some said no. It was, why are we arguing about this? With everything else going on, why are we arguing? This isn't news. Someone wrote an article over Jill Stein using the doctor title because she's an EDD, Doctor of Education. She's entitled to use it. I mean, you can have your opinion on whether it's pretentious or not. In a lot of ways, it frankly is. But you know what? You earned the title. You can use it. Probably should have repaired my ship before I came in here, but oh well. Oh, I did repair. I just didn't. Okay, we're fine. But this isn't news. It's just stupid. And of course, I'm watching of the podcasts I watch, of which I listen to several throughout my day. I am blessed to have a job where I do serve customers. I do a lot of phone work, but when I'm not on the phone and I'm doing other work, there's a lot of repetitive computer work that I have to do in my job. I can listen to podcasts while I do it. So I'm listening in one of the I'm like, I predict. I was going to listen to a particular podcaster. I'm not going to name them. Because of their Twitter feed, I'm like, I predict this will be the first half of their podcast, and I was right. And I was just like, this is a waste of my time. And here I am wasting my time bitching about it. I'm wasting your time now. So, having spent the first 2 minutes of the actual podcast, my very first podcast, bitching about a Twitter war, let's get into what's actually news and what I'm really concerned about. Because this I want to talk about. This is the part that concerns me. because it's nowhere in the mainstream news. The AP, the Associated Press reported it. I heard it on the through one of Tim Pool's segments where he read off the actual article. I don't have the article pulled up, and I don't have the capability to have the game up and do the article thing at the same time. That's not really my shtick anyway, because I'm not a reporter. I am not a journalist. What I am is I'm a guy who talks about his feelings on the internet, to quote Tim Pool, who is a journalist. I'm here to talk about what I think is relevant. Apparently, a record-level cyber attack happened across the United States today and over the last 6 months. And apparently, a good chunk of this was known by our government, and we're just finding out about this now. I don't know about you, but this concerns me. Google and YouTube were down for an hour today. Like, out. I had to do a whole bunch of shit. Now, separately, and I don't necessarily think these are related, it's just a really big coincidence. I had to futz with my internet just to get it working this morning. And it wasn't just at home. My work internet on a totally different service, a totally different town. Because I live in one city and I work in the next city over, which, okay, if the distance between cities is only like 5 miles, and these aren't exactly large cities, but that internet had real trouble struggling to get up. We have sustained a major cyber attack, and it is suspected that these are state actors. Now, the AP postulated that it was Russia, but it could have been Russia, it could have been China. We have any number of antagonists out there that are looking to get at us. And while you can go back to the news source at the AP, the Associated Press, to read the actual article, I don't want to dig too much into that bit of it because I think that has been touched on by people who are much better at it than I am. I would strongly recommend looking at Tim Pool's segment on it. It would be at, I believe that one will be youtube.com/TimCastNews, is I believe the channel you put it on. If it's not, it's /TimCast, because he's got several channels. But here's why it's concerning. We are moving more and more into a digitally dependent world. We rely on our ability to connect, right? I don't know about you, but I do remember a time when I didn't carry a computer with the sum of all human knowledge available to me in my pocket. You know, back when we had to put cassette tapes in the VCR. If you don't know what that is, ask your mom and dad. And so we really need to think about what this can mean about for modern life. And I'm having a deja vu moment because I have the feeling I touched on this after another cyber attack. But our whole global infrastructure is dependent on our ability to access the internet. 100%. Without internet, I couldn't do my job. Neither of my jobs. This is my other job. I can't do this without internet. And so we've become wholly dependent on this thing called the internet. And it's only taken 2 decades, largely speaking. It's 2020. Back in 2000, it was dial-up still for most of us, if not all of us. Now, I remember going to college and they had broadband, and I was like, holy crap, the internet moves so fast. Because at home, we still had dial-up back in 2005. And not only would it interrupt the phone lines if you were using the internet, but I read the comics, the webcomic 8-Bit Theater as it was being written, and it would take anywhere between 3 and 5 minutes to load a page. It was so bad. I actually burned through a color ink cartridge trying to print the pages off so that I wouldn't have to load the damn pages over and over and reread it. Now, I can read it on this friggin' thing, and it's just like, boop, next page, boop, next page, and we've become dependent on that. And I don't necessarily think that's 100% bad. Technology is a good thing, right? We build upon ourselves, we gain on, we build upon the foundations of the technologies that we have, and that creates for us a world that is easier for us to live in. You know, if you lived in the 80s or the 70s, life was harder, and you know it was harder. Simpler. There were some benefits to it. Life was simpler, but not necessarily better. It was hard, and it's still hard today, especially if you live in a rural area like I do. There's a lot of hard work you have to do just to get by. I spend half my summer splitting wood just to make sure we have heat that we're not spending almost $4 a gallon for. And I'm here to tell you, oil furnaces are thirsty, thirsty things. You'll drop a large tank of oil every month to month and a half during the cold parts of the winter. In fact, over this weekend, it was like in the 50s, and we're expecting a hard freeze below zero this week, below 0 Fahrenheit. For those of you who are not in the U.S., below 0 Fahrenheit. So it's going to get cold. You go through a lot of oil in an old house when it's cold outside. So we chop wood. And for those of you who have never split wood before, we're not talking like a few chunks with an axe for a campfire. No, we're talking... we burn an average of between 7 and 9 cord a year. For those of you who aren't familiar with wood splitting, a cord of wood is a stack of wood that's 4 feet wide by 4 foot tall by 8 foot long. And we burn between 7 and 9 cord a year. Partly because of... Actually, we've got a really efficient furnace now. But mainly because it gets so cold during the winter. It's not as bad as when I lived in the Dakotas. We had natural gas there, which is a nice, fairly clean-burning fossil fuel. Which actually, it's not necessarily a fossil. We were pulling it out of the ground there, but you can replenish methane, which is what natural gas is. It's methane. Where do you get methane? Go to any farm. You'll have plenty of methane. I'm heating my house on cow farts. But it's one of those things where life can be simple. I lead a fairly simple life, but it doesn't mean it's easy. Simple and easy do not mean the same thing. But it brought more concerns to my mind beyond the immediate scope. I mean, the fact that a company, or the company that produces the software for all of the servers that our military uses, and they announced that an exploit had been exploited, is concerning, certainly. No, it's not like we don't have a whole bunch of nuclear missiles tied to that system or anything. Actually, I don't know if they are tied to that system, but if all of our military branches use it, there's a chance, and that makes me nervous. But what really concerns me is, I was thinking about it, and we look at cyberspace as a toy, when in reality it is becoming part of our reality. We call games where you dive in and you've got the helmet on, it's virtual reality. And then when you look through your phone and it projects an image onto a picture using your camera of the real world, they call that augmented reality. So, and Pokemon Go is a great example of augmented reality, because you're using your camera, the Pokemon pop up, you throw the Pokeball to catch it, oh boom, look at that, you've got yourself a Pokemon. So cyberspace has increasingly become part of reality for us. When you get sucked into a video game, that becomes your reality, even if it's temporary. Even though other things, it doesn't have a permanent effect on your life necessarily, except maybe Entropia universe. It becomes a part of your reality because you are immersed in it. That cyberspace becomes the space you are in. And so, as we cybergize, technology's coming forth. The first wetware is being experimented with. Body modders are inserting RFID chips into themselves to unlock their doors. It saves their credit card information, and they put it under their skin. And while that kind of the current experiments with body modification, transhumanism, I look at them and I go, I'm going to wait a little bit longer. I do think that's the direction we're going. I think that we're looking at long-term a Ghost in the Shell style future. At the very least, we're looking at something closer to Ghost in the Shell than not. Transhumanism is going to become more and more prevalent over the next 2 decades or so. And the good parts of that are we might be able to transcend death, upload our consciousness into a computer. Just like in, what's the name of that show that's a movie? Expelled from Paradise. It's an anime. Just like in the movie Expelled from Paradise. If you haven't seen Expelled from Paradise, go watch it. It's an awesome movie. Absolutely fantastic. Actually, if you ever liked shows like Cowboy Bebop, or if you like Borderlands, the video game series, I think you'll enjoy Expelled from Paradise. Very, very well put together. Very reminiscent of the older 80s animes, but in a very modern style. But I tangent. But if you think about it, Elon Musk is currently working on Neuralink. And I've discussed Neuralink before, but just to touch on it, because this is my first actual podcast, and I want to, for those who are coming to this new, I want you to understand what I'm talking about. I'm sure you've probably heard of it. Elon Musk is working on a chip where they can saw out a piece of the skull that does not go all the way through to the brain, except for a small pinhole-size drill. They insert artificial neurons and connect it to the neural net of your brain. Okay? And in so doing, they can modify the neurons to cure certain neurological issues. Things that they're looking to be able to use this for is to help with Alzheimer's. That's kind of the big goal. We all want to stop Alzheimer's, which is good. That's a noble thing. I'm not poo-pooing that at all. I think there's a lot about Alzheimer's we don't understand. Like, why is it being hard of hearing accelerates Alzheimer's or makes it much more likely? And that is true. That is the case. If you are someone who needs a hearing aid, please find a way to get a hearing aid, because the percentage of people who need hearing aids that don't have them to end up with Alzheimer's, it's exponential. And this is one of the things I learned when I was on the campaign trail running for Vermont Senate, because I went to a forum for the elderly, and this was not something I knew. This was not a question I expected to come up, because it was regarding healthcare. I was expecting healthcare to come up, but not hearing aids particularly. I did not realize that hearing aids were not covered by insurance. In Vermont, we're the only state that doesn't do it. But when it occurred to me that, well, a hearing aid's like $5,000, like they go between $2,000 and $5,000, and I'm not talking about the hearing aids you can buy off of Wish. I'm talking about like actual hearing aids. An Alzheimer's patient can cost $500,000 a year. Okay, that's a little much. $120,000 a year to take care of. Yes, $120,000 a year, because that's the expense. The average nursing home is $10,000 a month. It's that simple. And I said, this seems like a really simple equation. And it wasn't. It's much more complicated than that. But with things like Neuralink, we could help to stave off things like Alzheimer's if it turns out to be neurological. It may not turn out to be neurological, but there are things that are neurological, like Tourette's, which full disclosure, I have. I absolutely have Tourette's. Other things that could help stave off is epilepsy, which is a straight up neurological disorder. Narcolepsy, I believe, is also a straight up neurological disorder. These are all things that Neuralink can help. And the experiments are very, very positive. They're very hopeful. And I've tweeted at Elon Musk, I'm like, look, I would love to be one of your, I would love to be a test subject for the clinical experiments. And of course he's never tweeted back, because he probably gets tweeted at 50 billion times a day. He's Elon Musk. Although he's getting quite based on Twitter lately. But this is early wetware. We're moving into the bounds of wetware. We already had some wetware. Cochlear implants, you have to put the metal plate into the skull, if I remember correctly. I think that's how it works. because you put the hearing aid piece on and it leads to a piece on the back of your skull, which is magnetic, if I remember correctly. I've only seen it in practice, like up close and personal, once, and that was with a coworker who was actually deaf, like born deaf, grew up deaf. They put the implant in and she could hear, and I thought that was awesome. And this was shit 15 years ago, almost 20 years ago. That's why I have that much gray in my hair. I was excited because this is the first true cyborg. I've always been fascinated by the idea of cyborgization. I didn't know what transhumanism was at the time, which is cyborgization, but I mean, this is the first cyborg, like true cyborg I'd ever met. And but it does bring up other concerns, because the more wetware we develop, the more capabilities we're going to want them to have, and one of the things that we're going to need to be able to do is update it. Now, what's the fastest way to update a chip that you can't necessarily plug something into? Wi-Fi. That's right. We could always update it using Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi is a wonderful technology that just happens to connect your whole brain to the internet now. Do we see the problem? Do we see the concern? Whoops. I'm jumping for no reason. The concern is, of course, that if it has access to the internet, it can be hacked. This isn't a question. It's not a question of if, it's only a question of how. Now, for some things, it's not going to make a rat's ass bit of difference. But do you really want someone to be able to hack into something that's connected directly to the neurons in your brain? I mean, okay, with the early Neuralink, maybe the worst thing they can do is induce a seizure, which sucks on its face, especially if you're driving. That's a good way to kill somebody. But who's going to hack into a person just to cause them to have an epileptic seizure? Okay, there's probably one or two assholes out there, but you know what I mean. But as we develop more and more, we're going to go from the neurological ability to connect, basically directly connect your neurons to the internet. How long before we're able to access the internet with our minds? Well, that's probably coming in our lifetime, folks. If you're under the age of 50, you're probably going to see it. Especially since scientists have already figured out how to reverse aging in rats. I predicted this 15 years ago. We called it the aging stasis, my ex-wife and I. We're like, this will be a great plot hole filler. And I'm like, this should be theoretically possible. We just couldn't figure out how. We made up that it was a pill that you took and it staved off aging for 10 years. We didn't know enough about aging at the time. We knew that it was a biological function. If it can be done biologically, genetically, then it can be reversed with gene therapy, generally speaking. We're still figuring out a lot about our bodies and our minds out. Well, come to find out, telomeres are what make you age. And I'm not going to get too deep into this, of course, because, well, I've already been through it before. I just need to make sure that my internet doesn't drop out by prioritizing my device, which is what I normally do before I do these videos. But, I am not always the most... There we go. I don't always think of it right away. So, if you're under 50, we're probably going to see the first brain connected to the internet directly. Whatever you connect to the internet can be hacked. Someone will figure it out. Maybe it won't be hacked today, but it will probably be hacked sometime in the next 2 weeks, especially if it has a Microsoft logo on it. So, on that note, this means that this opens up a whole new theater of warfare, which has been open already, but this just complicates things, right? This theater of warfare has been going on for a long time. Behind the scenes, none of us see it, none of us generally care. Until it comes to the limelight, when the AP reports it, none of the fucking mainstream media does. Cyber war is going to be the future of war. Now, for those of us who live by the non-aggression principle, we try to minimize the fact that that can happen, but it will happen. bad actors are going to take advantage of it. And when you start connecting your brain to the internet, as we will be able to do eventually, whether or not it's in our lifetimes, or pieces of our brains using things like Neuralink that need to be connected in order to update themselves, or future or next generation pacemakers, another Cyborgization article that uses a nuclear battery of all things. Once it's connected, it can be hacked, which means we really need to think through cybersecurity measures. Now, already there are companies out there that are working on it. They're working hard. You can use things like VPNs or Tor in order to help stave off these hackers. And actually, the proper term is cracker, right? A hacker is someone who can jump into a computer. They could find the exploits and break their way in, but generally they tend to be white hat. They're playgrounds, right? They're like, I did it because it's a challenge for me, but I don't want to do anything to you. That's a hacker. In the parlance, and this is back in the day, right? This is back during the early computer days, back when DOS was the main technology. Yes, I'm old. Hackers that were not white hat or playground people were known as crackers. They cracked into a system specifically to do so they could either A, screw with whoever they cracked into, or B, sell the exploit to someone for money. This is where the dark web essentially started. And can you imagine what'll happen when humans can start connecting their brains to this? Can you imagine a person rummaging around in your head? And this isn't an if, this is a when. This is how you can tell I'm from the country. Drink out of a mason jar. This is a when. This is happening. Not today, not tomorrow, but it's coming. We're facing Ghost in the Shell. And for the most part, I think that's a good thing. I do. But cyber warfare is going to be a major problem. It's going to be wars between hackers involving brain hacks, much like in Ghost in the Shell, brain swaps. The first episode of the standalone complex, they're chasing after a criminal who took over robot geishas. This gets a little in the reeds. Go watch it, please. It's an awesome series. But they took over some robots. They capture a whole bunch of dignitaries. They find out that the government official there liked swapping bodies with the robot geishas for some strange reason, but whatever. And what happened was a malevolent state actor waited for this dignitary, this government official, to download himself into a robot, then uploaded a co-conspirator into the body of the government actor, the government official. So it's the perfect impersonation. You're actually inhabiting the person's body. Now, is that going to happen in our lifetimes? I highly doubt it. We still haven't figured out enough about the nature of the brain to actually get that far. Is it conceivable that a hacker could plant a suggestion in you, though? Social engineers do it all the time. It's true. Now imagine if those social engineers had direct neurological access to your mind. I'm not trying to scare you. And in a lot of ways, these technologies are going to be hugely beneficial to us. So I'm not poo-pooing the technology. Not at all. I'm excited for it. Quite the contrary, I'm excited for it. And the camera's wobbling back and forth. Sorry about that. I want to see these things happen. It doesn't mean I don't have concerns, because in the long run, I'm a very practical person. So there are a couple things you can do right now to protect yourself, and I'm going to encourage you to do this. Y'all are on the computers all the time. You probably already do this, but I'm going to reiterate just for the sake of reiterating. Part the first, password protect everything you have. Use strong password techniques. Capital letters, lowercase letters, numbers, symbols, long passwords. Make sure you can remember them, but no one else can. Maybe it requires a cipher. Okay? I don't care. Protect yourself. On those things that really matter, two-factor. My Facebook has two-factor authentication. Yeah, my Facebook has two-factor authentication. Entropia Universe, I use two-factor authentication, which makes a lot of sense because there's money involved. Back when I played World of Warcraft, my Blizzard account has two-factor authentication. Not that I use it very much anymore, but it's there. If I could put it on Steam, I'd put it on Steam as well, even though all it is a bunch of fucking video games. If your bank offers it, put it on your bank accounts, your online banking. And if your bank doesn't offer it, ask them why. Protect yourselves. But the fact that the largest global technology company in the world got taken down today for an hour, and there's no explanation. We don't know if it was hacking or if it was a DDoS attack, which I doubt because it's Google, or if it was an internal problem. This is a problem, folks. George Orwell could not have predicted this so well. We've entered the cyberpunk dystopia. I've said it before. That's the whole basis of this show. And whether or not episode 2 will be on Sunday or if I'm going to postpone that for after the new year, doesn't really matter. Now that we're in the cyberpunk dystopia, it's time for us to really think about how we're going to live our lives in it. Because eventually I'd love to climb out. But I hate to say this, the utopia doesn't exist. Utopias do not work. They never function. They're always... Whatever utopia that you can create will always devolve into dystopia. This is what happened even in Star Trek. I'm serious. If you watch the Star Trek series progress, you get the more gritty original series where you're probably seeing opposite. But you start with the original series and it's fairly gritty. I mean, there's a lot of cool stuff in there, but life is hard and people die. And then you get to the next generation and it becomes utopic. It's all explorers and there's a lot of negotiations. And yeah, there's some battles. But everyone manages to mostly get out. Very few deaths occur, relatively speaking. And unlike in the original Star Trek, when you lost a ship, it was a major tragedy rather than a not entirely unexpected consequence of traveling through a vacuum. And then you jump to DS9, and it brings war to the utopia. And what happens when you have a group, and a federation, a nation, essentially, that doesn't have a military that's forced to go to war. And they're forced to adapt very quickly to that, using a non-military organization like Starfleet to become a navy. A true navy. Voyager, of course, was an outlier, and I'm not saying it was bad. Voyager was actually very, very good. But the premise of Voyager was so far removed from the other Star Treks, and I think it's part of what made it good, that you can't put that in the context of utopia versus dystopia. Well, then you get to Star Trek Picard. And the utopia has fallen. The Federation's become a dystopia. It's predictable. It's absolutely predictable. All governments like that inevitably turn to dystopia. Now, unfortunately, we skipped the utopia. And George Orwell predicted a lot of this. Trying to think, he had these television screens that could listen to you, and they were everywhere. Oh, Big Brother was always listening, and you never wanted to say the wrong thing. And now, if I say the wrong thing, Google asks me what I said. And yeah, they're in my house. This one's kind of hard to fight. I have a phone with Google Assistant on it, so of course I've got a Google Home. I've got one that's disconnected over here and one that isn't disconnected. Actually, that one's probably still unplugged from when I did my last dusting. But it doesn't matter. They're listening. Or, well, the phone's listening, so the speaker's not being disconnected doesn't matter. If a microphone's on, and it's a computer that's connected to the internet, like all phones are, and your speakers are, a hacker can hack in and listen to you. It's just a fact of life. Kind of sucks, but it is what it is. And as a particular whistleblower named Edward Snowden exposed, your government can too. Now, here in the United States, we're supposed to have constitutional protections against that. Obviously, our government doesn't always listen to it. They abuse the Pfizer warrant system. And they get away with it because they're the government. And if you whistleblow on them, they try to throw you in jail. Which is why Edward Snowden currently lives in Russia. Now, there have been a lot of calls on Twitter for the president to pardon Snowden, which I absolutely believe he should. Because being a whistleblower is not illegal. And he tried doing all the right things. Like, if you go to his, I don't know if it's still on YouTube, because Rogan took down most of his stuff on YouTube, but if you go look for Joe Rogan and Edward Snowden, try YouTube. It will be on Spotify, if not on YouTube. Snowden breaks it all down. It's actually a really good show. I learned a lot from it. And I think that knowing that the bureaucracy listens in, and they don't necessarily listen to everybody, right? Do I think that the quote-unquote deep state is listening to me right now? Maybe. Probably not. I'm not all that interesting. Does that mean they can? Yes. Does that concern me? Absolutely. And so, herein lies the premise of what the podcast is going to be. Because all kinds of interesting things are coming out. And we don't know what's coming next. There's this thing called the Great Reset that the World Economic Forum published. And I know that some news places have said that it's some big conspiracy theory, whereas others have said it's an actual conspiracy. I don't think it's a conspiracy, because to be a conspiracy, generally it's not out in the open. They're telling us what they want to do. And government leaders are out there basically saying this is what they're doing. You can find the documentation on the Great Reset at the World Economic Forum. But if you read the documentation, it's things like you won't own anything. And you'll be happy. Everything you need will be rented, delivered to you by drone. Sure, Jeff Bezos will like that a lot. But it creates this Orwellian undercurrent. Doesn't it? Property a thing of the past? Well, last I checked, property is one of the 3 inalienable rights. Life, liberty, and property. That's what the founders of my nation fought for. It's the basis of the Magna Carta. So, am I concerned about this theoretical Great Reset? Yes. Because reading through the documentation, it looks to transform our current system into something very similar in economic function to the way China does things. Now, don't get me wrong, China's been very, very successful. They're also a highly oppressive government regime. That concerns me. They go into this thing called stakeholder capitalism. That concerns me. And so I'm very concerned about what this Great Reset means. And I'm doing research on it. I'll probably do a podcast specifically on it when I'm done my research. It's very complex. It's very much in the weeds. I want to make sure I have my information correct before I come back to you with information on it. Because what I don't want to have to do is a whole bunch of podcasts issuing retractions, because that makes me look like an idiot. But what I have seen so far is Orwellian. George Orwell would look at this and say, which one of my books did they rip that off from? And I'm seeing people on Twitter, like there was a time when everyone's like, Orwell's awful. Just 4 years ago, people were saying the idea that Orwellian fiction could come true as a horror story. Just this week, I saw someone on Twitter say, well, actually, 1984 is a great idea. What? What are these people smoking? That's the worst possible idea. This is why I say it. This is why I say that we're navigating the cyberpunk dystopia. And I'm going to navigate it with you. As I try to find my way through, I'm going to try to help be a torch in the darkness. That's what we're building here. So I'm going to ask you now, if you like what I do, share my videos. As I jump into the podcast, whether I'm going to jump into it full bore immediately or if I start in on January, excuse me, I am asking you to share this. We have got to make sure that we know what's going on and we're aware of it. Now, am I being all conspiracy theorists about this and like, oh my god, there's the, like, Hideo Kojima's The Patriots and they're controlling everything in a shadow government and it's all... No, I'm not saying that. One, it's stupid, right? It's a great storyline for a fiction novel or for a video game. But realistically, the world just doesn't work like that. Two, if you pay attention, they're not even trying to hide it. It's out in the open. Justin Trudeau said right on one of his own newscasts that it's time for a great reset. Or he said a reset to the way we do economies or something like that. It was a recent podcast, and he had one of those religious convert smiles. It's time for a reset. It looked, I swear to God, it looked just like it was creepy as fuck. But this is why I'm doing this. This is why I've decided to move away from the typical gamer content and move into the podcast space. With video games as a background, because that's what I do. Because I can't not talk about it anymore. I can't not talk about it anymore. One, because I find it very interesting, if a bit frightening, at times. And two, because I think these discussions are necessary for us to be informed. Now, am I going to be the font of all information? No. Please, fact check me. If you find something that I say that is erroneous, I want links in the comments showing me why I'm wrong. And if it's come to find out I am wrong, I will admit to it. But I went through this in my last main segment video. I'm going to go through this again. The purpose of this show is to shine a torch through the darkness. And I'm not talking like the traditional Orwellian, it's the darkness of oppression and here comes the light of freedom. No. It's the information darkness. There are a lot of people who, they look at the surface. And we're all guilty of it. I did it for a long time. And it's just like we go about our lives. And we don't think about things. We do our 9 to 5, we grind away, we have our kids, we have our spouse. And that's all that matters to us. But because we're not paying attention, the powers that be are shaping things around us with or without our consent. And one of these days, we're going to go out and be like, that's really funny. I remember a time when I could drive myself to work instead of having to take the bus. When I was able to buy fresh beef instead of lab-grown beef. You know, we've come into a world where there's an actual Soylent. Now, no, it's not made from people like in the movie was called Soylent Green. Hang on. What was it based on? There's a book that it was based on. Make Room, Make Room by Harry Harrison. I thought it was based on a different book. But anyway, it was based on Make Room, Make Room. And of course, Soylent Green was ground up people. But Soylent is an engineered food product. And this part I think is actually really cool. So I'm not poo-pooing on Soylent or the engineer who came up with it, because what he did is he looked at the chemical composition of what we as humans need for nutrition, and then after talking to a few medical doctors, put all of these nutrients into like the chemical compounds, the pure chemical compounds, into a powder, mixed it with water, and after saying a prayer, drank it. It's gone through some development. Not huge changes, though. Like, there's a couple of the chemical bases that he's like, using the pure one isn't as good, so we found like a plant substitute that was very heavy in that particular one. You can find it right on the Soylent website. It's very cool. The only reason I stopped using them, because I have used them. They actually kind of taste like drinking a thinned cake batter, is what the flavor is really like. Again, not bitching. It wasn't bad. It just very strange experience. But the reason I stopped using them is because they are fairly expensive, relatively speaking. But they're a whole meal in a bottle. And apparently this engineer survived on nothing but Soylent for a month. The original Soylent, before he even thought about marketing it as a dietary supplement or a meal replacement. And so we're getting to the point where we can do that. Can you imagine a world where you drink 3 meals a day? And there are people that are going to love that, because what he was trying to do is he thought about, where am I wasting the most time? And he's like, cooking and eating and clean up afterward. That's a huge waste of my time. I'm an engineer. Every hour that I can work is like $150. So he engineered himself a meal that he just has to like pour into a cup and drink, and he can drink while he's working. You add 15% alcohol, you've got mother's milk. Joking. Actually, I'm not. That's actually what mother's milk is. But this is the direction we're going. And some of it's good. I've used Soylent to take over my to replace my lunches when I want to reclaim those hours for myself to do other things. On the other hand, it also logically, taken to its logical conclusion, could turn into a situation where that's the only choice we have. Now, do I think that's going to happen in our lifetimes? Probably not. You know, I don't foresee that happening in our lifetimes, but it doesn't mean it's impossible. And it doesn't mean we don't want to pay attention to what's going on around us. Because people who want power will do anything to take it. So, let's talk about the definition of cyberpunk and my definition of cyberpunk, because I did this in my last one. We're going to talk about it in this one. The original definition of cyberpunk, according to Google Dictionary, is a genre of science fiction set in the lawless subculture of an oppressive society dominated by a computer technology. Okay. Well, the internet's kind of a lawless subculture. There's some rules. But in a lot of ways, it's the Wild West. Still. Not like it was back in the 90s and you could go into a chat room and pretend that you were 5 years older or 10 years younger than you actually were in order to try to get a date. But in a lot of ways, the internet is still the Wild West. But here's my definition. For those who did not see my Sunday episode or didn't watch the whole thing. A world fictional or not, where a technocratic and oligarchic aristocracy rules through strategic censorship, control of key infrastructure, oppression by social pressure, and the erosion of negative rights, life, liberty, and property, using media to both sensationalize and desensitize the population in order to keep them distracted, placated, or controlled. Does that not sound like our modern age? Does to me. Now, pre-COVID, the oppression thing wasn't such a big deal here in America. I know other countries, depending on what country you are in, your amount of freedom you had varied. A lot of countries don't have freedom of speech like we have here in the United States, and I feel for you. But most of you have an elected form of government. You do have the right to vote the bastards out. In fact, here in the States, that's kind of what we say. When we realize that the people in office are assholes, we vote the bastards out. Now, we have a real hard time voting them out because of the way that people vote. They're low information voters. They just check off the D's or the R's that they've been checking off all their lives, that their parents checked off. That's how politics works in most places. It's rule by tribe. We need to break out of it. Because now we're in the most boring cyberpunk dystopia we could have possibly come up with. I was hoping to see neon lights and hover cars. I wanted my multi-pass. How many pop culture references have I made in this friggin' episode? There is something that I do want to let you all know about. I've said before, this podcast is going to include a lot of Vermont-centric pieces to it. Obviously, this episode had almost nothing to do with Vermont. But because Vermont is what I know, this is where I grew up. I've lived most of my life here. I spent a decade out in North Dakota, this is true, which is a very dynamically different environment. Much more extreme, especially in the weather front. The people are as hardy, if not hardier, than Vermonters. The flatlands makes for a very different kind of people. Like, from a very technical perspective, I'm a hillbilly. Or a woodchuck is what we call them here in Vermont. It's a Vermont hillbilly. I live in the hills. I live a very simple life, fairly speaking. The complications that I bring, that are in my life, I have deliberately brought into my life, like being a YouTuber. I'm a burgeoning politician here. And I don't know if this podcast is going to help or hurt that effort, because in 2022, I do plan on running again. I ran for Vermont Senate as an independent. I am currently talking with the Vermont Libertarian Party. I might be running under their ticket, or I might be an independent again. I make no secrets about what my political views are here. I have not talked politics before here, save my last episode, or some very wedge issues like when I bitched at Blizzard about Hong Kong. But I'm finding I can't not talk about this anymore. And I hope that you'll join me for this journey. Over the last 2 years, going on 3, you've all traveled with me. You've become members of the manor. And at least 3 of you have shown your faith in me by becoming patrons. And one of the things I'm going to be doing in the New Year's, I'm looking to expand some exclusive content. And I'll let you know if I decide to continue doing that on Patreon, or I might ask you to move over to Locals. I'm exploring their platform. It has more capabilities, but there's also a cost involved. So I'm going to see if it's worth it. I want to thank, if for those of you who decide this is not the direction you want to see the channel go or you no longer like it, I want to thank you for the time that you've given me. But every road has a turn. I came to a fork and I decided this was the road I had to take. I do not regret taking this road. And I may expand into other segments that strictly rely on do gaming, just so that we have that. But with the time I have and what I'm doing now, this is the direction I'm going to go. Today, I saw something that I had to talk about. And it spurred me to accelerate the schedule I had laid out for releasing this podcast. Now, again, we'll figure out Sunday whether or not I'm going to continue on the podcast immediately, or if I'm going to wait until January to go to pick up with episode 2. But what it comes down to is there's a lot going on. And for the last half year or more, I have hopped on here and I have had to curtail what I talk about in order to avoid. I don't even know why I was avoiding it. Maybe because I didn't want to lose my audience. But it doesn't matter. I need to talk about these things. You all matter to me. But there's something that I learned in the last year. You can't hide from the things that are important to you. You can't hide from things because they're controversial or because people will disagree with you. You can't lie down and just let things happen. You can't let your voice not be heard. And so, with everything that's happened in the last couple of years, you know, media gaslighting, the culture's gone insane, COVID, changes to our way of life in the last 12 months, things that people don't even see. I have decided to light the torch. Try to find a way through the darkness. Who knows? I might turn into the next successful podcaster. Or someone might mail me a tinfoil hat. Call me an Alex Jones wannabe. But everything I have said tonight is verifiable. Go look at the AP. Go look at the World Economic Forum. It's all there. It's not in hiding. Well, that's it for today, everyone. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Please like, share, and subscribe down below. We are on the road to 13 million subscribers, one subscription at a time, so make sure you subscribe. And as always, I appreciate the support, and we'll see you in the next one. The Julien McBain Show is a McBain Manor production.